They smiled for the cameras, won Oscars, and made millions fall in love with them. But behind closed doors, their own children were living in fear. Hollywood's golden age was built on illusion, and nowhere was that illusion more dangerous than inside the homes of its biggest stars. The parents you're about to meet weren't just flawed. They were controlling, cold, and in some cases, truly cruel. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the worst parents. Old Hollywood never wanted you to know about the rage behind the glamour, the silence that broke their children, and the secrets that took decades to surface. Stay with us, because the last story may be the most haunting of all. Joan Crawford. In the 1940s, Joan Crawford reigned as Hollywood's ultimate symbol of glamour, poised, immaculate, and fiercely ambitious. Fan magazines celebrated her as a devoted mother, and the public adored her carefully crafted image. But behind the gilded doors of her Beverly Hills mansion, a far darker story was unfolding. Her daughter Christina would later reveal that childhood under Crawford's roof meant living in constant fear. There were no warm embraces or gentle goodnights, only rigid rules, impossible standards, and a volatile temper that could ignite over something as trivial as a wire hanger left in the closet. Crawford was consumed by control. When the cameras stopped rolling, she allegedly forced her children to scrub floors late at night, punished them harshly for minor infractions, and wielded motherhood as an outlet for her own unresolved fury. When Christina's memoir, Mommy Dearest, was published in 1978, it sent shockwaves through America. Audiences struggled to reconcile the beloved screen icon with the tyrannical figure described within those pages. Crawford, who had died in 1977, never faced accountability. Her public legacy remained largely untarnished, but her children carried wounds no Hollywood ending could heal. Bing Crosby. To the world, Bing Crosby was the voice of comfort, a warm, velvety crooner whose songs carried millions of Americans through the darkest years of the Great Depression and World War II. His rendition of White Christmas remains one of the best-selling singles in history. Families gathered around their radios just to hear him, trusting that voice like an old friend. But behind that gentle smile lived a man his own sons barely recognized as a father. Gary Crosby, in The Eldest, broke the silence in his 1983 memoir, Going My Own Way, describing a childhood marked by physical punishment, emotional distance, and impossible expectations. Crosby reportedly used a belt to enforce discipline, demanded academic excellence, and forbade his boys from showing any emotion, insisting that tears were a sign of weakness. The toll was devastating. Two of Bing's sons from his first marriage, Dennis and Lindsay, later died by suicide, their private suffering a tragic contrast to their father's public warmth. The man whose voice defined American tenderness left behind a home where tenderness was rarely shown. Fame, it turns out, is no substitute for fatherhood. Henry Fonda. On screen, Henry Fonda embodied the conscience of America, principled, steady, and deeply humane. From The Grapes of Wrath to 12 Angry Men, he portrayed fathers and heroes that audiences trusted unconditionally. Yet the man his own children knew bore little resemblance to those beloved characters. Jane and Peter Fonda grew up in the shadow of a father who was emotionally unreachable. He could hold a dinner table captivated with conversations about politics, history, or art, but asking his children how they felt simply never seemed to occur to him. For Jane, that silence became a wound she spent decades trying to understand. She threw herself into achievement, hoping accomplishment might finally unlock his affection. It rarely did. Their relationship only began to soften in the final years of his life, when age and illness gradually wore away the wall he had built around himself. Fonda's failing wasn't rage or cruelty. It was something quieter and in many ways harder to name, a deep emotional absence that left his children feeling invisible. Peter, too, struggled profoundly, and Jane has spoken openly about the lasting psychological impact of growing up starved for her father's approval. Some wounds are not made by fists. Sometimes silence is enough. Ethel Gum. Before the world knew her as Judy Garland, she was simply Frances Gum, a small-town girl from Grand Rapids, Minnesota, blessed with a voice that could stop a room cold. But standing behind that remarkable child was a mother who saw not a daughter, but an opportunity. Ethel Gum was the quintessential stage mother, relentless in her ambition and blind to its cost. She pushed Frances onto stages from the time she could barely stand in front of a microphone, dismissing exhaustion, illness, and tears as inconveniences to be managed rather than signs of a struggling child. When MGM came calling, Ethel handed over control and her daughter's well-being without hesitation. By the time Judy was 13, studio executives were administering amphetamines to keep her energized through grueling shooting schedules and sedatives to bring her down afterward. Ethel not only permitted it, she enabled it. That cycle of stimulants and sedatives would shadow Judy for the rest of her life, ultimately contributing to her death at just 47. Garland later reflected with unmistakable bitterness that her mother only loved her when she was performing. It remains one of Hollywood's most heartbreaking confessions, a reminder that behind the rainbow, there was a little girl who simply wanted to be seen as enough. Ryan O'Neal. In the 1970s, Ryan O'Neal was everything Hollywood celebrated: tall, golden-haired, and impossibly charming. Women adored him, studios courted him, and films like Love Story made him a household name across America. To the outside world, he had it all. But his children, particularly his daughter Tatum, knew a very different man. When Tatum O'Neal won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress at just 10 years old for Paper Moon, she became the youngest competitive Oscar winner in history. It should have been a moment of shared pride. Instead, her father allegedly responded with jealousy rather than joy, mocking her achievement, competing with her spotlight, and making her feel like an inconvenience rather than a daughter. Tatum later wrote candidly in her memoir, A Paper Life, about growing up neglected and emotionally wounded, describing a father incapable of genuine love. Addiction, absence, and instability defined her childhood in ways no Academy Award could compensate for. The two attempted reconciliation multiple times over the decades, their relationship lurching between brief warmth and painful collapse. Even a shared appearance on a reality series couldn't fully bridge the gulf between them. Ryan O'Neal's story is a cautionary tale. As old as Hollywood itself, that charisma can dazzle a crowd while devastating the people closest to you. Mildred Turner. Before the glamour, before the magazine covers, before the nickname that would follow her forever, Lana Turner was just Judy Turner, a shy, pretty girl from Wallace, Idaho, trying to survive the Great Depression alongside a mother who refused to surrender to circumstance. Mildred Turner was tough, resourceful, and fiercely determined. As a single mother scraping through some of America's hardest years, she saw in her daughter's extraordinary beauty something more than a blessing. She saw a lifeline. When a chance encounter at a Hollywood drugstore brought Lana to the attention of a talent agent, Mildred didn't hesitate. She uprooted their lives and pointed everything towards stardom. But ambition without boundaries carries a quiet cost. By 16, Lana was being escorted to parties populated by powerful men decades her senior, while Mildred stood nearby, more proud chaperone than protective mother. The dangers were visible to almost everyone but her. Lana later reflected that she never truly experienced childhood, only an accelerating career that swept her into adulthood before she understood herself. That early displacement left deep marks. Her personal life became a series of turbulent marriages, painful affairs, and public scandals, including the shocking 1958 stabbing death of her abusive boyfriend, Johnny Stompanato, at the hands of her teenage daughter, Cheryl. Through it all, Lana remained quietly heartbroken, admitting she never really learned what love was supposed to look like. Tippi Hedren. Few faces defined Hollywood cool quite like Tippi Hedren's. Discovered personally by Alfred Hitchcock, she became an icon of understated elegance through films like The Birds and Marnie. But Hitchcock's obsessive control over her career, which he has described as a form of abuse, effectively derailed her stardom before it fully bloomed, leaving behind a woman carrying profound disappointment. That disappointment, whether intentionally or not, cast a long shadow over her daughter Melanie Griffith's childhood. Tippi wanted success for Melanie, but on her own terms. As Melanie grew into a striking teenager, the boundaries that should have protected her were instead quietly dissolved. By 14, she was already navigating the adult world of Hollywood parties and industry figures far beyond her years. Most controversially, Tippi permitted Melanie to move in with Don Johnson, an adult actor nearly 10 years her senior, a decision that later stunned the public when it became widely known. Tippi maintained she was simply supporting her daughter's independence, but the outcome told a different story. Melanie grew up equating love with instability, cycling through addiction, tumultuous relationships, and emotional struggles that followed her well into adulthood. Hers is yet another Hollywood cautionary tale, a mother wounded by the industry who, reaching for the best, inadvertently handed her daughter the same sharp edges that had once cut her. Anthony Perkins. To audiences worldwide, Anthony Perkins will always be Norman Bates, that soft-spoken, deeply troubled young man standing behind the front desk of the Bates Motel. What few realized was how little acting that role required. The roots of Perkins's quiet anguish reach back to his earliest years. His father, Osgood Perkins, was a respected Broadway and film actor who died suddenly of a stroke when Anthony was just 5 years old. But even before that loss, Osgood had been largely unreachable, a distracted, self-absorbed man who treated fatherhood as a secondary concern. The abandonment, both emotional and then permanent, left a wound in Anthony that never properly healed. He grew up anxious, withdrawn, and deeply uncertain of his own identity qualities. Hollywood found useful on screen, but that made his private life extraordinarily difficult. For decades, he concealed his sexuality, living in fear of public exposure at a time when Hollywood showed no mercy to those who deviated from its accepted norms. When Perkins eventually became a father to sons Oz and Elvis, the generational pattern quietly reasserted itself. Despite his love for them, he remained emotionally guarded and difficult to reach, a man who struggled to offer the very closeness he had spent a lifetime craving. He died of AIDS-related complications in 1992, leaving his sons to make sense of a father they knew mostly from a distance. Neglect left unexamined has a way of writing itself into the next generation.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new videos. See you in the next one.